Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Release Special Interest Group Deep Dive. We are your hosts. I am Jaice Singer DuMars. I work for Google. And
I am Caleb Miles. I also work for Google.
So, first of all, a show of hands, just so we don't have too much overlap. Who was in the intro to SIG Release yesterday?
Ooh.
Okay.
Great
participation. All right. Fantastic. So hopefully there won't be too much repetition. We're going to just go through the overview deck briefly, and then we've got a really special surprise, courtesy of Caleb Miles. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we're going to just go over a few aspects of the SIG itself and why it was originally created. Ultimately, the release SIG is about maintaining the covenant of trust between the user community and the project. And when we say covenant of trust, what we're saying is that when the community downloads and uses a release, there's a certain assurance baked in about code quality, test passing, at least a reasonable chance that there's not high-level security vulnerabilities, that everything basically should be production ready. And the way that it is maintained is through the actions of the release team in coordination with the work done in the SIGs. So essentially the release team is overseeing that delivery process and trying to provide the highest quality and most useful releases that we can. And in that, we are trying to constantly iterate on our processes. We try and have an improvement tangibly present in every release cycle.
So just a quick recap from the last session about the values. It's trust. I mean, we are running people's critical infrastructure. People build their businesses, both their internal businesses and businesses on top of Kubernetes as a vendor. So we take that faith very seriously. And so consistency, making sure people can depend on that release process, delivering a high quality release close to when we intended. We are lucky to generally get within a week of our chosen deadline, which was set 3 months in the past. Like Jaice was mentioning, high quality. It's test passing. Hopefully, no critical vulnerabilities. Transparency. We do a lot of work in the open, and we're tracking more and more things into Git for posterity. And continuous improvement. Jaice has done an amazing job leading our release retrospectives for almost 2 years now. So it's been fantastic. So can actually.
Yeah, so just quickly, another thing we want to do as a SIG is to provide opportunities for new contributors. I had mentioned before, and if you did not see it in person, Tim Pepper did a fantastic session on this, and Noah Abramson has a fantastic blog about this as well. So there is plenty of great information about that out there. So if you go through the Googles and find that, I highly recommend it. We also try and decide release policy. So we're trying to balance the needs of developers and the community, and that's tricky sometimes because developers want velocity and the community wants stability. So we're always dancing on that knife edge. We're also trying to drive automation in the project so that there's less human things and more machine things. Unfortunately, the release process does have a lot of manual steps and a lot of manual work. Anybody who has done the docs work definitely has felt that, and that is something we're trying to improve. And lastly, we're trying to set examples for other SIGs. So we have a really clear role definition for people who interrelate with the release. We try and always replace people who are doing the same roles over and over again so that we're not having people get burnout. And lastly, we're trying to find good ways to communicate lots of information that impacts people's lives. So that is a relatively delicate ballet.
So we do the day-to-day, meat and potatoes work of SIG releases, the release retrospective, how do we do, what can we do better in the future, and coordinating a bunch of work across the SIGs, particularly in documentation and bug triage. But we're just going to fly through these slides because many of you were here at the intro session. So we said last time, lots of things checked into Git, more and more from 1.3 to 1.10, and hopefully we'll do more for 1.11 and 1.12. And stolen from Tim, great summary of the release process in terms of the release cycle. And this is to show that there's always work going on. We're always working on stabilizing the previous releases while we're getting the new release out the door. So everything's going on. And all trains are running on all tracks all the time. And this is a really team effort. This is just to highlight there's 117 contributors just to our SIG release repository, which is mostly policy stuff. So it does take a whole village to release Kubernetes.
Yeah, so how we accomplish this, meetings, and we have the specific release team activities, and really acting as a funnel for work from SIG. So the how is really a lot of communication. So the role definition is something that we are working on constantly, trying to make sure that what people do in the release process is well documented. And in just a little bit, we're going to go into a deep dive on a couple of those roles and what that looks like. Yep.
Just to highlight that it used to be just the one release R back in the old days. You couldn't even find the page because it's in the Wayback Machine. So we no longer have a wiki, thanks to Aaron for moving that away from the wiki and into proper files checked into source control. And so just a little bit of elaboration on the roles. And Jaice mentioned that we've added the shadow role, which is really helping for succession. So we've really opened up the bus there for releasing.
So in our weekly meetings, of course, we try and make them interesting. There may or may not be puppies, so if you like puppies, come to these meetings. If you don't like puppies, still come to the meetings. And we do quarterly releases. Yeah, I would also say that a hallmark of our SIG is that it's actually fun. We really do try and make these activities fun. The release process can be a thankless job sometimes, and there is a lot of camaraderie. It's probably, I think, in my experience in the community, the closest knit of all SIGs. By the end of the release team, everybody's friends. It's just a really intensely bonding exercise. So I guess they say an ordeal will bring people together.
I was going to say shared punishment.
Yes. So yes, that's pretty much it.
And so we can go into our deep dive on the roles. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is start with talking about life as a release lead. And interestingly, we have Josh Burkus in the office or in the audience right now, who is the current lead. I was the prior lead. And I tricked Josh into taking the job. He foolishly fell for my ploy to say how much fun it was. Sorry, Josh.
You'll need to change jobs.
That's right. Well, so first thing about being a release lead is that it requires a fair amount of domain expertise in the project. So being a developer or being somebody who's solid in test infrastructure, or those things may or may not help you. What really helps you is to know what the project looks like as a whole. So when I first did the release lead for 1.8, I had no intention of doing it. And the prior shadow was Marunubi, and he sent me a Slack message saying, I'm not going to be able to be the release lead for 1.8, and I think you'd be good at it. And I said, you're kidding, right? And I'm like, I don't even know even enough to get started in that role, because that's a lot. And he said, and I remember this conversation well, because it was one of those turning points in my conception about this. He says, it's not a role where you need to know how to do a lot of technical things. It's a role where you need to know who to talk to about technical things. And as somebody who's spent a life in program management, project management, and leadership, that really resonated with me, because it's like, oh, so this is really truly a leadership position, or it is becoming that. In the past, the release lead position was more hands-on, more technical, tweaking this or that, and really being highly involved, whereas the right thing for the project, the right thing for Kubernetes as a whole, is to elevate that up to more of a leadership and facilitation position. So in the course of 1.8, I really believe that transition happened in full force, because my coding skills are not anywhere near the quality of other people in the project. So So basically, the course or the arc from 1.8 to forward was to really focus on building a program or a project around the releases. And so that meant defining who the stakeholders were, who are the roles, who's involved, and coming up with a project plan that is durable. So one of the things we did was extract specific dates from the timeline and start working on the notion of weeks. So essentially we could have a project plan that could translate from release to release without being so tied to specific dates. We also started checking in more documents into GitHub. We looked at, as a team, how do we make meetings more effective and facilitate communication better. So for example, in 1.10, I started sending regular release updates to Kubernetes dev, so people would always know what was happening this week, what was coming next. And we're basically in this constant fine-tuning process around what the project and program looks like. So it's really, it is a job that requires a lot of technical aptitude in the sense that you need to know what's going on and be able to validate things, but really you are building a trusted relationship with SIG leaders, with your team, with the people in the roles, and then you're also making sure that there's somebody there along the way who's hopefully going to be able to replace you in the next release cycle. Because as of yet, we have not had anybody be release lead twice in a row. I did 1.8, and then I was the shadow for 1.9, and then I did 1.10. So I've probably been the closest to being multiple times, but it's certainly not something that we want to encourage because there's a high level of burnout factor after being a lead. So Josh, take care of yourself. No, I would not recommend it. So yeah, essentially, the release lead is a chance for us to distill these values out and really be a good keeper of that trust. And so one thing I would say, a misconception about the release lead, early in the project, the release czar position was much more of a unilateral decision maker, and obviously you would be involved in decision making, consensus and whatnot, but back then it was a little more, you had a lot of authority as a person, and technically speaking the release lead still has a lot of authority. If I wanted to unilaterally decide to hold off the release, I could. But the thing that is really important to remember about this position and any position, actually, leadership in the community, is that you are really never yourself. When you're in that position, you are a representative. And so there were times, for example, that a decision would come up that would be in some way related to my employer. At the time was Microsoft. And I would recuse myself from those decisions because I wanted to make absolutely sure that there was no conflating of my company and the decision that I made. And so again, when you're working in the community, you work for the community. You don't work for your company, and there's a very strong hard line between those things at all times. So just as something as guidance for anybody in the room, if you are in a leadership position, that is a paramount value of the project. When you work for Kubernetes, you work for Kubernetes. So any questions before I hand it off to Caleb? All right. And now to talk about what life as a branch manager is like.
Yeah, life as a branch manager for the release team. It's actually a pretty relaxing job, I'll say. It's largely reading the release schedule and making sure you do the things at the right time, which is really the hardest part of the job. One day there'll invent some kind of software tool that will remind you when important dates come up. I hope it'll take off. We're lucky to have Ike with us, who actually wrote a lot of the first generation of this release tooling. And since then, we've got a larger and more expanded release engineering team that's been able to make the job much more easy than it has been in the past. So life for me as a branch manager means I live mostly here in the Kubernetes release repository, which has got all of the tools you could ever run. The big ones are, historically, is a tool called Anago, which basically is the one-stop shop for releasing. It is a very well-crafted bit of Bash here, and actually probably easier just to show the workspace release. And let's
Can everybody see that, or do we need to make that a little larger font?
must bigger. Thankfully, it's JavaScript, so
Yay, JavaScript.
future is now.
I never thought I'd say that.
Exactly. Let's see. Still got here. So the primary tool here, that's the entry point. We have David to thank for lovingly tending our collection of build and release tooling. They do amazing work, and without them, definitely could not release. So Anago is the historical tool. It has been wrapped and more or less, I guess, superseded because everything can get better, which is the whole point of having a retrospective, by a new tool called Google Container Builder Manager, GCB MGR for short. So one of the really exciting things about this is that Anago, you had to run that somewhere inside of Google in order to actually cut a release. And so this tool will hopefully soon open the release roll up to anyone, not just from Google. And let me just do something off to the side really quickly. Type in my super secure password, very secure, very secure. So like the name alludes to, GCP MGR is based on Google Container Builder. And so I'll do a quick plug that if you've got a way of, if you need Docker images, this is a great way of doing it. So this runs all the stuff in the cloud, and you used to have a very beefy machine in order to cut a release. I think my machine back at the office has 80 or so gigs of RAM and really large SSDs in order to do all the cross-build. As Kubernetes has grown, people have been asking for more and more architecture, so it does take quite a bit of horsepower to get the builds out. And moving this all to the cloud has been wonderful for that. Great. So, and life is basically pretty simple. In the beginning, before code freeze, as the branch manager, you are mostly responsible for just producing alphas according to the schedule. So that's run directly against master, and we can actually try and show some of that sausage being made, cutting a mock build now for you all. So let's pray to the live demo gods. Oh, I know. I gotta do some more magic over here. So sorry. Be a screen that will probably pop up annoyingly anyway. And do some git pulling. So hopefully that's also okay. Cool. Oh man, fast forward. This is great. Such a good life. David is also super careful with the git, so that makes your life very very nice as the release branch manager. So let's see. Running with no arguments, GCB MGR will just show you the last builds, and so this gives you a UUID for a build that's running in Container Builder. And so if I come back over here, do some more kitchen magic, MGR, give some flags. It's actually pretty easy. Master, yeah. It's gonna ask me for more credentials, so that's why I've moved the terminal over here. It's true. Although I cut alpha yesterday.
Yeah.
So we're gonna. So GCB manager breaks up the release process into two phases. There's the stage, which gets all the does all the builds, and then there's the release process, which moves those bits into the right locations. So that's GCS buckets, so Google Cloud Storage, and images that are hosted in Google Cloud repositories. So let's see this. We're gonna stage, and we're going to do a build at head, and do off of master, and ask me for more credentials, which is not interesting. So you will get, it will very quickly jump in and tell you that your job has been successfully submitted, and you will be able to go see it for real. So I'm going to tail, which will require me to enter some more credentials. We really do like our security, which, you know, it's important. Boom. There's that. And if you were looking quickly, you would have noticed, and actually I will not show you this because it's actually a pretty not interesting page. But I'm going to start tailing the logs, and you can see the process going live. And after giving my credentials for the last time, though, that was another thing about Anago. You had to give your credentials multiple times during the release at critical points. It was also very interactive in terms of asking you to do stuff. And let me make that a bit bigger, and hopefully GCP will start sending me information about the build. Oh, there you go. And so, since we're a containerized world, a lot of this is building and running on with Docker images. So you'll see a bunch of pulls, and it's all happening in the cloud. So, which is great because the conference Wi-Fi is actually amazing here. This has been wonderful. So thank you to our fabulous sponsors and everyone who made this conference possible.
Don't expect the same Wi-Fi in Seattle.
But yes, and then it'll start rolling through Anago, but running in the cloud for you. So this is more or less as the branch manager. You just look and see that everything works smoothly. And as long as you get the dates done correctly, life is pretty good. So that's my job as a branch manager. So there's interacting with this. After code freeze, we use a tool called branch diff to. So at code freeze, what we do is we create a new branch and we fast forward that branch into the release branch that we're working on stabilizing. And at some point, we only admit cherry pick. So the bar for quality and importance goes up pretty dramatically at that point. So this is going to be doing a bunch of stuff, and it's going to put bits in the testing repositories and in our staging bucket. So you can watch along there if you'd like, or we can take questions about anything. Well, maybe not anything, but related to the release. It is supposed to protect access to the streaming logs. So I enter my credentials, and this is largely to do the fetching. So accessing the logs that are being streamed from Container Builder does require authentication, and I get to provide that. Thankfully, it is at Google, so it's all very seamless. If you have noticed, I am running this on my Pixelbook and connecting to a machine that is not my Pixelbook. So doing all that plumbing from my local machine with a very limited operating system is magic that I do not fully understand, and if I did, I could not explain. Yes?
So this seems fairly straightforward as far as the timeline requirements. Sorry if I missed it, but for the release team, one thing that was overlooked, like it's supposed to be gate jobs as well. What the time requirements
Okay, so the question is, what is the time commitment for a release lead? It depends. So if you think of the 3-month arc of the release, the first month is relatively low time input. You have a 1-hour a week meeting. You're focused on filling roles and making sure that everything is in place to move through the life cycle of the release. So maybe 4 to 6 hours a week, pretty reasonable. The second month is about double that because you start having to pay close attention to it. And the third month can vary wildly. If things are on track, it stays the same or sometimes even less because you're really just watching things and your team is providing you with updates. In the last couple weeks, it gets pretty intense. You're dealing with 1-hour meeting every day of the week, so there's a guaranteed 5 hours of time, at least an hour of prep time, so make it 10, and then figure just all the horse races happening in various places you have to keep an eye on and see who's getting things done or not, and where you have to intervene as a lead to make sure that things are on track. 1.8, for example, we had a huge slew of unfinished docs. And so I had to go and literally chase down every single person that did not have a doc and haunt them every single day to make sure it was on. So it can be pretty intense. What I would say is that if somebody wants to be a release lead, a requirement of the job description is that you are in the release team in some capacity as a fully fledged member and not a shadow for one full release cycle. You will definitely see what that looks like firsthand. Yes, Mr.
I would say it's not easy to be a release lead if you don't have support from your employer, because you're going to end up taking more time.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
you have to plan. Your employer must be prepared for it to become a full-time job for you in that last month.
Yep, for sure.
There are other release roles that could be done around your vendors.
Yeah, and
That's not one.
CI signal. So looking at our dashboards, which I can show you all here.
Say the dashboard to make me a little nauseous right now.
Well, I'll try and carefully choose one.
Oh, right, no, let's look at the upgrade dashboard. We really want to see a lot of links in there.
Sure. Let's try maybe at CD upgrades.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy. Well, all right. You can't see anything yet. Great. It's totally fine. It's totally fine. Don't even worry about it.
Everything's fine.
Everything is fine. Well, yeah. Well, tiers 1, it's not even terribly red. So we've got our tool test grid. If you're familiar with historical CI systems, they're similar to CI Dash, where you've got tests running independently by some unknown agent that is publishing results in a well-structured, meaning XML format, that is collected and displayed. So that's the architecture here. This is not actually running any builds. That work is done by another tool, which I should just actually be stacking this so you can keep watching the interesting stuff. Next Life, definitely. Our amazing, I mentioned or alluded to, our amazing test infrastructure team has produced, moving us off of Jenkins some time ago. Well, not all that much time ago, but it's receded in the back of my mind anyway. So we've got a fantastic tool called Prow that is got a plugin system that runs on top of Kubernetes that is doing all of the running of the builds for you based on GitHub events. So it's all great, and you can run Prow yourself because it just runs on Kubernetes. So there's a getting started guide in there if you have a similar challenge of automating GitHub. We've got a solution that you can use.
Question? Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about like the state of the 3-month release process, and if there's conversation about making it smaller, like doing, I don't know, like daily pushes or weekly or monthly or something like that.
Yeah, so the question is, what is the state of release cadence? Are we fixed on these 3-month cadences? Are we looking at faster or slower? There is a surprising or not surprising, how you look at it, division of folks who want to do less, and then there's more. So there are trade-offs to both. Essentially, when we start talking about who our customer is and we look at enterprise customers, their tolerance for change, especially rapid change, is lower. So the idea of an LTS plus maybe more frequent point releases starts to look appealing at that point. And then there's the, like, we just need 3 a year and they're rock solid, and devs have plenty of time to make sure that features are hardened and whatnot. We are going to have to tackle that in the near future. It is not in a state right now where we have a definitive opinion as a group. It will probably be a collaboration between the SIG and SIG architecture, and perhaps the steering committee as well, because there will be material impact to our user community in a way that probably very few other things could be in the way that this will. So what we want to do is be very careful and cautious about the decision-making process, that it's transparent, that there's auditability, that there's time for comments, and that we're not doing something that's going to inherently damage our standing in the community.
Right, and also coupled with this somewhat is the ongoing work to break up the monorepo that is Kubernetes. So all of these efforts, they all intersect. So it will take us some time to kind of detangle things. So I guess TLDR either way.
Who owns detangling of the code? Technically, from a strategy standpoint, that's SIG architecture.
But practically, it's whoever shows up.
Right. Whoever actually does the work. And if there's anybody who's interested in getting involved there, the cloud provider breakout is a fairly large effort around breaking code out, and the patterns and anti-patterns that they're running into will be very important to learn from as we move forward.
And you can find more information there at Working Group Cloud Provider. And here, let me try and bring that up there.
Yeah. Any other questions? Josh.
So what can we do to make people not wait until code freezes to fix our tests?
One thing is getting faster feedback. And so if you went to the Contributor Summit, the first day, Tuesday, build and release locally is still a challenge. There are many different platforms because we're a sprawling open source community to try and support. So getting developers faster feedback is definitely important. It is hard to run the end-to-end tests by yourself, and that remains true. So if you are a developer and having the expectation that you must submit a pull request in order to get your pull request validated for correctness, that is a challenge. Given the complexity of supporting critical infrastructure, the tests also do take a long time because we have to work well from just a single node to 1,000, 5,000 nodes. So there's lots of testing that goes on, and so getting all that going, it can be a challenge. We're always working on it, and thankfully Aaron has snuck into the back here from SIG testing. So
Yeah.
Aaron was looking for the other Aaron.
Yes.
But also did do a nice little hair flick.
Yeah. And another thing that we can do is just increase our communication level and raise the awareness, because honestly, not many people are spending their time glued to test grid unless you're having some sort of trouble sleeping. It can happen. So yeah, communication is a key strategy there, for sure. Any other questions? Yes.
What are the biggest areas of software engineering work that need to happen to make releasing less painful? I mean, I've heard a lot about communication process and these things. What are the major efforts there?
What are the things that software engineers could do to improve this process? A big one is looking over sort of the way in which labels are automatically managed. So the bot has a huge play in this. I would love to see the bot be happening in all the right ways. It's good. It could be better. And part of that, again, goes back to process, that we have a little bit of confusion there. And the bot is the de jure, thing in this whole process. So in a way, we can have our human processes, but if the bot disagrees, then the bot wins. So that's certainly one area. Just general testing infrastructure, making downgrade tests easier in terms of scalability testing, the ability to do bisects faster and to figure out what codes impact scalability is tricky. That was a huge manual process during 110 to try and diagnose where the thing was breaking scalability.
Yeah.
So those are all areas.
And definitely spreading that knowledge as well. There's a lot
Yes.
of human process work that needs to happen as well. We find ourselves sometimes siloed into particular offices, and really expertise needs to follow the sun because
Yes.
projects of this size needs to be able to move all 24 hours a day. I think Aaron is slinking up because we got some thoughts as well.
Have a mic.
No, hop up.
Just
Gotta
on
introduce
the,
yourself though.
oh, hi, Aaron Kirkenberger, SIG Testing Steering Committee. I've served in Kubernetes releases since V1.4. SIG beard as well, SIG hair. So just on the just on the testing front, real quick, one feature you may not be aware that TestGrid has is the ability to email an address if a test has gone from green to failing. So if you are part of a SIG, each SIG should have its own dashboard, and that SIG can monitor if its specific tests are passing or failing. So two SIGs I want to call out as doing a really awesome job would be SIG Storage and SIG Networking, who actually have like SIG networking testing failures at googlegroups.com. So a Google group that gets notified anytime their tests go from green to red. So the reason this works for them is, number one, they're keeping their tests green, and number two, it goes to a group, not a single individual, when the test fails. And so they can do something about this. I'd love for us to live in a world where we could do the same thing for the release master blocking or release branch blocking tests. Unfortunately, some of those just go from green to red and back and forth way too quickly. But it could be helpful to have some kind of group of people who are interested in helping with triage to get notified when those jobs flip back and forth. That's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Aaron. Any other questions before we wrap it up? All right. Sincerely appreciate everybody's time here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And have a good rest of the day.
Thanks for coming.